Welcome to the virtual fundraising tips, tricks, and how-tos webinar from Tech for Campaigns. Glad to see everybody here virtually. I'm joined by Kristen Vine and Brenna Crombie. And we're going to run through a couple tips of those tips and tricks. So first, I'll just start with the overall introduction to the program here. Then we'll go to Brenna for how to run a successful virtual event. Then Kristen's going to talk about some call time strategies and our Polaris app. And then we will open it up for Q&A. And yes, Lexi, we will share the PowerPoint and make this available on YouTube as well. So just the 15 seconds on Tech for Campaigns. We're a national nonprofit that is on a mission to establish a lasting digital and tech arm for centrists and progressives. That is through talent, both on our staff and volunteers, training, and technology, like our call time app. So we're proud to have worked with over 200 campaigns in the past 2.5 years, worked 300 projects, grown our volunteer base to almost 12,000 folks, and worked with campaigns from county commissioner and state house races all the way up to the presidential level. So in that time, we've certainly learned, quite a bit of lessons, built up best practices. But now, as we all know, the only certainty we face is change and election day. Election day, for the moment, is not going anywhere, even though people are trying to take voting rights away. And the thing that we have the most control of as practitioners and staff are to adapt our media communications plans, adapt our voter contact plans, and adapt our fundraising plans. Not just adapt them, but really embrace wholeheartedly, upfront, and quickly the fact that the world has changed and we need to find a new playbook. So there's a lot of different fundraising tools online, organic social media, direct-to-donate ads, email, of course, even texting. We're going to talk today about the two that have changed the most virtually overnight, and that's town halls / virtual fundraisers, the catch-all being events, and call time. Those are obviously two mainstays of campaigning, but they've just radically, the way they've worked has radically changed during this time period. So Brenna's going to talk about events. Kristen's going to talk about call time. Remember, none of this to say that you don't have to be thoughtful, well-targeted, considerate, all that about who and when and why you're reaching out to folks. But we do believe you should still be raising money. We just have to do so in a very targeted way now. So I'm going to hand it over to Brenna to run through virtual events.
Hello, everyone. So my name is Brenna, and I am the deputy campaigns person here at Tech for Campaigns. And I want to talk a little bit more about how to run a successful virtual fundraiser. So I've been previously a campaign manager, a finance director 3 times, and also worked at a digital firm for a while. So I have a lot of experience on how to raise money online. I love finding new ways to raise money for campaigns, and a lot of campaigns have been asking me, what should I be doing? Should I be fundraising? And I believe the answer is absolutely yes. Like Greg mentioned, each state is being affected differently at different times, and being cautious about how you do it overall is really important. But I think everybody should still be raising money in different ways than we have before. So in this new world, I think adversity often becomes a time for innovation, and that's how we found the virtual event and virtual fundraiser. So a couple campaigns have been confusing different virtual events, so I wanted to take the time to explain how to think through your different options and what's best for your campaign. So there's obviously benefits to doing both. So town halls give candidates the opportunity to speak directly to their voters in a very personal way, but make sure that your candidate, regardless of elected status, is speaking and talking like a source on the issue. Make sure they're prepared, make sure they know everything that's going on in their district and state at the time, so that they can answer questions to voters directly. With virtual fundraisers, obviously it's a great way to bring in financial support during a really difficult time to raise money, but it's also a great way to learn from donors, and influential people in the community about how the pandemic is specifically affecting different organizations in your area. And then because there's all these different purposes, you'll have different audiences and different digital channels to use for both different events. So obviously one is going to be open and one is going to be closed for donors and supporters. And then the different digital channels that there's a couple options for both. But although there's a couple ways to do all of these things and to achieve the town hall style, there's actually way more options that you can be doing on digital. And you should definitely pick the one that fits best for your campaign. So we kind of boiled them all down. There's about 3 levels that we kind of came up with on our end to make sure that each campaign is kind of fitting into where they think their staff capacity, their candidates press training, and their resources fall at this time. So for those smaller campaigns, like the state level races, I definitely recommend that level 1 for you. It's a nice, safe place to be. It's people who don't really have the staff availability to help or the press experience, but we're recording a video. It could be something funny, like what are the candidates doing in their time at home, or something more serious about the pandemic. Also updating your website to include a resources page, or sending a weekly email with all of those resources that you found. But be mindful about your audience. If you're sending something that's very state or district specific, make sure to exclude those people that are outside that universe so that you can avoid a lot of unsubscribes. So the next level, level 2, which is for medium-sized campaigns like congressionals, what we really recommend there is different options like the Q&A stickers, which does kind of require some staff follow-up, and texting supporters. We were chatting with a candidate and elected official in Texas who recently sent out a lot of texts to their supporters and donors and volunteers just to ask and check in and see how they're doing. And that's been really successful in starting the conversation and making sure that his campaign was at the top of their mind and they didn't forget about what he was trying to do as an incumbent and as a candidate. So that could be really useful for those medium-sized campaigns, as well as office hours, which normally I know a lot of people do this in person, but having an online alternative where it's the same time every week that constituents can ask questions and the candidate's available is a great resource to give to your voters and constituents. Also for those larger campaigns, those statewide, gubernatorial, things like that, you might want to consider level 3, which is those live events, the Facebook, Instagram. It's a great way to directly speak with large groups of people. If your candidate frequently speaks to the media, they feel comfortable with technology, this is a great option for your campaign, and I definitely recommend it. With the caution of there's always things that can go awry. Like, for example, I think a lot of people remember when Beto O'Rourke famously Instagram lived his dentist appointment, where he was completely on message the entire video and everything that was said was really substantive, but what really lived on from that was a screenshot that shortly went viral after the campaign, and that was not a good look for the campaign. So being wary of that, but overall it's a great way to get your message out to voters. So back to the fundraising aspect of it. When you're talking about virtual fundraisers, there's a few tools that we recommend when hosting those. So for those smaller campaigns with a smaller budget, there are 2 free options, the Google Hangouts or Zoom. We do recommend the Zoom option more because it has slightly better audio quality. For medium-sized campaigns, the congressionals, the Zoom Pro, it's a very small fee, but I think you're getting a lot more with that upgrade if you're a larger campaign. And then the biggest ones, the US Senate, your gubernatorial statewide races, we definitely recommend that Zoom webinar option. It's definitely a larger monthly fee, but we think it's worth the trade-off. So if you are a larger campaign, here are some things to consider when making that decision. Zoom webinar allows you to have registration tracking, which when you're having a fundraiser, you can give each co-host an individual tracking link. So you can see who is a successful host, who's actually brought in the most people. You can track that. You can download a CSV after the event to have all that data, which is great for a big campaign who, you know, can really utilize and track that data on your own end. With attendees, also with the webinar feature, it allows for not only for more people, but also gives you the ability to control and mute the audience, which can save the campaign from hecklers or internet trolls, and you don't want that. So it's a great feature when you are anticipating a larger group of people to be on the call. The last cool feature is just it adds little fun things like the Q&A section is a little bit easier to handle, as well as a polling feature, so you can interact with more people on the same call. So that would be a great option for those large campaigns. So what's new about a virtual fundraiser versus a real fundraiser, and what should be done differently? There are really 3 main things that you should keep in mind when doing a virtual fundraiser. You definitely need visuals. You're losing that really fun, you know, era of fundraising when you can look at food and talk to other people and their nice houses and there's cool paintings to look at. All of that's gone. So you need to make sure that you have a visual, even if it's just a presentation or something to look at, articles or a surrogate. Make sure to have that prepared in advance because it's so critical to keeping people's attention. The second thing is making sure you have a moderator. That can be a staffer, volunteer, anybody who's willing to keep the event on track. It's helpful when you come to the Q&A section as well, where they can read out the questions out loud, so your candidate is not scrolling through all those questions in that chat section and getting distracted. So it really keeps it on track and saves you time. And that last thing that you can do is make sure that you don't have any technical issues. This is key because you can really lose a lot of confidence and support that way if you don't have everything set up in advance. Make sure that your candidate and your moderator gets on early, checks your lighting, checks to make sure what's in the background of your call. Sometimes you don't know how far your camera goes out until you start the call up. And another quick tip is make sure to wait, like we did on this call, you know, 2 or 3 minutes after the call actually starts to allow for those people who are logging on who took a second, and make sure that everybody is present before you start going to your actual fundraiser. So I created a timeline here for you guys to help kind of picture what you need to do to ensure a successful event. There are things that are pretty much exactly the same as a normal fundraiser. Those first 2 steps: finding co-hosts, establishing minimum donations, sending them templates, email templates to send to their list to make it easy for them, establishing deadlines to keep all your hosts on track, and sending out those invites obviously is really important. If your candidate does it, your staffer, whoever, making sure they're following up. All of that definitely stays the same. The one cool thing about virtual fundraisers is location is no longer a barrier. So that person that you wanted to invite across the country to a fundraiser can now attend. The one thing I would say to be aware of is make sure that the time of the event can cross all of those time zones and it's not too early or too late for a certain group of people. So the main things that are different from a normal fundraiser are 2 weeks before, just make sure that you're creating those visuals, having enough time to send it around to your staff, make sure your candidate looks at it, as well as making sure if your surrogate wants to have anything up there, make sure that's loaded up, approved, at least 2 weeks in advance. Those can take longer than you think to put together. And then also 1 day in advance is when you should send out that confirmation link with all of the ways to access the Zoom or however you're doing it, the event, because you don't want that to be floating out there too long. The point is to raise money, and you want to make sure everybody that has that link has the intention of giving or donating to your campaign. And then the last thing, I'll say it again, make sure 30 minutes before the call, you're logged on, your visuals look good, your audio is working. It is so important. And those are the things, the timeline that I would suggest for a virtual fundraiser. So the best question, how can you raise the most money possible for your virtual fundraiser? Obviously, there's 3 parts to this. Before the call, somebody should have already asked them for money, be it a co-host, the candidate themselves, or a staffer, however that's done. During the call, there's a lot of fun things that you can do. You're losing that thing that you get when you're at a fundraiser and you see your friend writing a check, that social pressure of walking by the check-in desk without donating. All of those things are gone. there's no pressure anymore, no in-person people kind of trying to remind you to donate. So this is what I recommend doing instead. So plan ahead of time, have a co-host, post the ActBlue link in the chat. So for example, there we have, now it's time to get your credit cards out, go donate here, and put that link in the chat so that everybody has access to it at that moment. And then have other co-hosts who donated or plan to donate chime in and say, I just donated $250. Another great thing to do is wait, let it be awkward, let it be quiet, let people take the time to go online and make that contribution, and have your candidate, as they're reading it, or the moderator chime in and say, thanks so much, Jerry, for your $250. That's really great. And that will help increase that pressure and hopefully get as much money in as possible. After the call, you can get a template ready in advance and send that email immediately to anybody who has not donated. They're at their computer, they're thinking about your campaign. Is the best time to get that money in the door, but it needs to happen immediately. And then the last thing that you should definitely always remember to do is thank the people that did donate within 24 hours of the event, because I always say you cannot ask them for a second donation until you've promptly thanked them for the first. So make sure that's an important thing that your staff can do to follow up. And if you want to learn any more about what I just talked about, or campaigning in general in the era of coronavirus, we have 2 different guides that we have out that we can put in that link in the chat right now so you guys can see. One will be about campaigning during coronavirus, that includes tips for social media, communication, tips on campaigning remotely, and new ideas for your field team to do. The other is a more in-depth guide that we can that we talked about today, and goes a little bit more into detail and provides all the information in there. But if you have any additional questions that I did not answer today, I'd be happy to answer them. My email is there. It's brenna@techforcampaigns.org. And I would love to hear your questions. So thank you guys so much for your time today. I really appreciate it. And I'm going to throw it over to my colleague, Kristen, to talk more about call time.
Great. Thank you so much, Brenna. So first, I just want to acknowledge that many candidates and their staff are anxious about calling people and asking for money right now. It might really seem counterintuitive to ask people for money when so many people are out of work and struggling to make ends meet. It's really important to remind ourselves why we're doing this work in the first place. We know that with better leadership, better decisions would have been made from the beginning. The only way to truly address this crisis and prevent it from happening again is by electing leaders who will make the right decisions from the start. And doing that costs money, whether we like it or not. And furthermore, our opponents are not going to stop raising money, so we can't either. Many years ago, when I first started raising money for candidates, a very wise campaign manager taught me something that is even more relevant now that we are no longer able to raise money through in-person events. And that's that call time is sacred. You can keep your candidate focused by making sure that everyone connected to the campaign, including the candidate's family, knows the importance of call time and when call time is scheduled. Remember that the candidate, their spouse, and their kids are going to be home now. So candidates will need to coordinate with other family members to find a time that works best for all involved. Don't schedule any campaign meetings during call time, and make sure campaign staff knows not to contact your candidate during call time hours. Now that candidates are doing call time from home, it's important that candidates have a physical space set up in their house that allows them to focus and be free of distractions. An empty desk and a chair with a computer screen, or no computer if they're just using physical call sheets, is really important. Make sure the space they choose to make calls from is clean, free from distractions, has good internet connectivity, and good cell service. And when now that your candidate is physically prepared for call time, make sure they are armed with the most up-to-date information regarding guidelines and available resources for their community and their state. Put together a list of resources complete with links so candidates can easily direct people to the resources they need if asked. The second step is make good lists. Ensure your candidate is calling the right people at the right time with the appropriate ask. We recommend that candidates start by making calls to donors who have already made a contribution to your campaign. We call these donors max out donors. because even if they've already made a sizable donation to your campaign and only have a few $100s before they hit that maximum contribution limit, these donors are already invested in your campaign success and believe in your candidate and your message. They will really appreciate hearing from your candidate directly. And eventually, you're going to run out of donors who have already made a donation to your campaign. So when it is time to start reaching out to new prospective donors, we recommend starting with donors closest to you physically. So this means donors in your district and then in your state. They will have the biggest connection to your campaign and will be the most likely to donate. And then finally, make sure that you're using technology that facilitates efficient call time management and note taking. Tech for Campaigns recently unveiled Polaris, which is a groundbreaking new technology that combines automatic donor research with the ability to make specialized lists and find contact info for donors, all with state-of-the-art dialer technology that allows your candidate to be on the same line as your staff. So your staff can be taking notes while your candidate focuses on talking to donors. This will add structure to your call time and will also ensure that all call notes can be recorded by staff so that the candidate only has to worry about talking to donors and nothing falls through the cracks. So now very quickly, I'm going to show you what that looks like. So when a campaign starts using Polaris, they're going to import all their contacts from NGP and any other source. This includes any and all CSV files, including Gmail, LinkedIn, cell phones, and literally any list, including those provided by consultants and other vendors. One of the ways Polaris is different from any other technology out there is that we want you to be able to upload and analyze your entire list instead of just a sliver. As soon as the lists are uploaded, federal and state contribution history will be added to all of your contacts. Without interns or volunteers able to come to your office and look up donor history, this feature will be a huge time saver for your campaign and will also ensure that your candidate is talking to donors who are most likely to donate to your campaign. So here you can see kind of top line information like the donor's name, their occupation and employer, their location, any donations they've made to your campaign, their last donation and the last time you contacted them, and then their estimated capacity. The estimated capacity is a prediction that tells you how much they could donate to your campaign based on factors like how much they donate to campaigns similar to yours, how often they donate to campaigns, the amount they usually donate, and the date of their most recent donation. We can also find phone numbers, emails, LinkedIn profiles, and other bio information for all of your contacts as well. So if I want to see any individual contribution history or just any notes for any of my contacts, I just click on their name and their profile will be brought up on the right. So I can see how much they've donated to my campaign, what we predict they could make as an additional donation if they've already donated to my campaign, as well as all of their personal info, bio, notes, phone number. And then down here, I can see the donation history both to my campaign and also over the last 4 cycles. So it'll give me the total they've donated to how many individual campaigns and what their average donation amount is, which can really help you figure out what your ask should be. And then further down, I can see every single federal and state donation that this donor has made. And then below that, I can see any call history with them as well. So earlier, I was talking about the importance of making specific specialized lists of donors for your candidates to call during call time. We have over 20 filters that allow, we have over 20 filters that allow you to make lists based on past donation history, employer, occupation, and many more. Earlier, I talked about the importance of focusing on current donors during call time. Polaris allows me to filter my list based on remaining capacity and donation history. So I can focus on the donors who have already made a donation to my campaign and who have the capacity and the likelihood to make an additional large donation. I also mentioned the importance of focusing on donors who live in my district and in my state. So I can filter by those things as well. So once I'm done making a list, I can save it, I can export it, or I can add it to my candidate call time. So this is the call time queue. When my candidate is ready to start call time, they simply go to the call time manager and put in their phone number. And then the software is going to call them. And once they pick up, they're going to be dialed into a live conference line. Polaris gives staff the ability to join the same line as the candidate, so that while the candidate is talking to donors, staff can be listening in, taking notes, and making sure any follow-up is done. This frees up the candidate to just focus on talking to donors and gives the staff peace of mind because they don't have to worry about any follow-up falling through the cracks. Because the candidate can no longer make calls from an office and now has to make calls from home, it's going to be even more important to get through as many calls as possible in the shortest amount of time. Polaris allows your staff to call into a second line so that when a candidate talks to a donor who is ready to make a donation, the candidate can transfer that donor to another line, and the staffer can take credit card info and process the donation immediately. This allows the candidate to continue making calls and talking to as many people as possible. You can also, Polaris also gives you the ability to split up your calls into lists, split up your list, sorry, onto several different lines, also known as double or triple dialing. So your staff can call through donors, and when they get someone on the line, they can transfer it to the candidate. We are working with several campaigns right now that are getting through upwards of 100 calls an hour using this method. We even had a campaign get through 1,400 calls in one day. Our pricing is based on the type of campaign you are in, and we have worked hard to make it as affordable for campaigns as possible during this time. So you can reach out to me directly, and I'll be happy. I'm happy to discuss that further. And with that, I'm going to pass it back to Greg to do some Q&A.
Unmuted, video back on. So we're going to go into Q&A a little bit. Got some questions during the session. First, I think Brenna will address one that came up in the chat.
Yeah, so there's a question about if your candidate is in New York right now, which I know is getting hit very hard, and I'm really sorry to hear everybody in New York is struggling so much, and I know that's very difficult, but there are still ways to reach out and do fundraising. I think calling your Rolodex is always a really safe place to be. Making sure that your network and the people that you know personally before the campaign is being hit up is a great place to start. Also, those previous donors, and if you wanted to also sort from the people that are outside of New York, I think that's a safe bet. You know, calling people in Louisiana, that's that example. Another state that is not affected as much, making sure that those donors who already gave maybe $2,000 and they haven't hit their max yet, but you know that they're big supporters, calling those people is a great place to go next. And also a great thing to do with call time, if you're calling New York donors, ask them how they are. I mean, it's just a really simple way that you stay at the front of their mind and understand, especially if you're an incumbent, making sure that they understand that you were there for them is going to be really key. And also if you're a challenger, saying, you know what, the person that we have in charge right now is not calling you personally to ask how you're doing. So I think in either case, just starting that call in a really cautious way of, you know, how are you doing? How's your family? And then kind of seeing where it goes from there is a great place to start.
So one question Brenna answered in text a little bit, just might as well rehash it because it's a big topic, is Zoom and Google Hangouts. Zoom, the free version or even the paid version are I'll start over. Google Hangouts and Zoom's default calling feature are relatively similar products. Zoom typically has better audio and visual quality, like Brenna mentioned. It's got a few more widgets and bells and whistles and things. But if your campaign is already on Google and you're doing a relatively small event that you're not expecting a ton of people in, Hangouts will generally work pretty well. although we do have our preference towards Zoom. Where you start to see a really huge difference is in a call like this with 50 people on the line. We're using the webinar version. We have the Q&A, we have the screen sharing, we have all that stuff set up to make sure that everybody's experience is ideal. And that's where the sort of like stark differences start to happen between the two. Whereas if you had 200 people on a Google Hangout, any of them can unmute themselves at any time and cause a ruckus. So that's a bit about the key differences there. I will answer that one. Zoom security, Zoom bombing. Webinar is one way that people cannot Zoom bomb. Again, there's also now a password feature that's coming. That is every new Zoom call you set up has a little password that is associated with now people who click on the link will need to have that password. It's I think like 6 numbers or something. And that's one way to just make sure that like the links aren't just traveling randomly around the internet. Same thing goes with the Google Hangouts. That can help when folks are logged in properly. Yeah.
There's a couple of
Any other questions?
Kristen, how do you think Polaris compares to RevUp?
Well, I used to work for RevUp.
Yeah.
So I've worked one of the reasons that I joined Tech for Campaigns is because I knew that they were building a product that would take all of the things that I really loved and that a lot of campaigns really loved about RevUp, but also would add some things that RevUp was missing. So for example, like the ability to enrich with contact info. So Polaris allows you to, we have a commercial vendor that we use that allows you to find things like, phone numbers, emails, LinkedIn, bio info, things like that. And also RevUp does not have a feature that allows, for a call time, like a dialer feature, which I think is really, really important. Also, we are a nonprofit. So I think that gives us a little more flexibility to work with campaigns on pricing. And it also just allows us to really not be kind of beholden to any investors. And we're really just focused on our mission, which is to help campaigns win by providing them with the tools, training, and technology they need.
Cool. Any other last questions?
I know somebody asked about double dialing with a staffer and candidate, which I think is a really, really important part of Polaris, especially in this era of everybody being remote. So Kristen, if you wanted to speak to that.
Sure. So double dialing can be really, really helpful because basically what you do is you're going to split up your list into, depending on how many staffers you have, let's say 3 different chunks. So the first chunk will be for the candidate to call, and then the other 2 chunks will be 2 different staffers calling. So once one of the staffers gets someone on the line, they're simply going to add that person to the line of the candidate or to the queue of the candidate so that as soon as the candidate is done with one call, they can hop on the phone with that donor and they can talk to them. It's really a great way to make sure your candidate there isn't any kind of like dead time in between calls for your candidate. So it's just going literally, the candidate is just going from one person to the next person without any time in between. I'm happy to discuss more also.
Yeah, I think just to add on to Nate's question about when folks are not located at the same place, I think like a dedicated chat room or a Slack or something can make it possible for that real-time switchback. Admittedly, that'd be pretty advanced level. And the whole sort of double dialer feature is definitely like once folks are comfortable using the regular dialer to try it out and would definitely take more sort of real-time coordination.
But you can do it.
Yeah, you can do it.
Now's the time.
And I guess I'll answer Mary's last question. Polaris cost per month, it starts at basically a few $100s and goes up depending on the campaign level, and also depends on the usage. But like Kristen said, we're impact oriented, not profit oriented. So we're always willing to hear about why, folks, how folks can make things happen. Any last questions? We have just a few minutes left.
Oh, also, I just wanted to address Helena's question about all of the lists are discrete and not shared. One of the really important parts of Polaris is that we're not like, we don't share, all of the information is yours and yours alone. So any lists that you upload are for your eyes only and are never shared with anyone ever.
Cool. Well, seeing no further questions, we'll wrap it up. Thank you to Brenna and Kristen. Thank you all for joining. Hope you found some useful information. Please do not hesitate to reach out to any of us about just sort of more specifics on any of the things we talked about. Webinars are something we do probably at least once a month here at TFC and have been doing so for a couple of years. So got a lot of experience in running these types of events and seeing what works and doesn't. And obviously Polaris is an exciting development. So thank you all very much. And we'll see you all on email or Slack or phone, whatever, virtually. All right.
Thanks, guys.
Bye.